ChatGPT Plus is free for college students through May. Here's the thing. You've got a lot to do between now and then. Studying for finals, writing papers, trying to keep your life on track. And ChatGPT can help with all of it. It can quiz you for your econ exam, make a study guide from your French notes, plan out your meals and study breaks. It can get really specific on how you like to learn. It can even help you come up with ways to stop procrastinating. So from now until summer break, take advantage of all the ways ChatGPT can make your life easier. Restrictions apply.
It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
Well, they had to have something new, a dance to do for recreation. So someone started twisting. A cat who was really hep put down a step, a new gyration soon. All the kids were twisting, it didn't take long.
The great Frank Sinatra, everybody's twisting. Everybody is twisting in frustration or disgust or twisting to defend their support for Matt Gaetz. I don't think of any of the Trump nominees thus far, there has been, not in my eyes, but in the eyes of the public, the legacy media, I don't think there's been anyone more controversial than Matt Gaetz. There's been a lot of controversial picks. Some people aren't crazy about Tulsi Gabbard. A lot of folks think RFK is a little bit of a wacko. But there is nobody that gets people worked up on the right and the left like Matt Gaetz. Why? Well, someone who has made a very interesting populist progressive case for Matt Gaetz in his newsletter, which is essential reading if you want to know the stories that you don't get to read in the other outlets, is Lee Fang. Lee Fang is an investigative reporter par excellence and just one of the best journalists out there. Lee, it's great to talk with you again. It's been a long time.
Hey, Frank, it's been too long. There's been a few things in the news since the last time we spoke.
That's for sure. A lot I want to ask you about. Let's begin with Matt Gaetz. I guess the narrative that's on cable news, especially MSNBC, CNN, but also the New York Times, the Washington Post, is that Matt Gaetz is a right-wing extremist with an incredibly checkered past who probably had sex with an underage girl and did every drug there is. How could there be any case to confirm him no matter what someone's ideology?
Well, listen, I follow the policy debates that happen in Washington. I follow it all, but I really kind of zero in on the political policy that I think matters. And what matters to me is corporate influence. What matters is who has power in society. Is it the regular little guy? Is it the middle class? Is it these multinational corporations? And Matt Gaetz stands apart from most House Republicans in that he's paved a unique path. He is the first House Republican to really join the Bernie wing of the Democratic Party and eschew corporate and leadership PAC money, refusing money from lobbyists and from PACs. And he's doing so because he's constantly fighting battles that you won't see on the front pages of the New York Times or on CNN. And that's on these issues around breaking up Wall Street, breaking up the big tech companies, regulating the data broker industry, banning those non-compete employment contracts that prevent people from moving around to different jobs, ending forced arbitration, even fighting back against the tech companies that attempt to make it to provide a cost for people to even read the law. There's companies like Westlaw and LexisNexis that have tried to charge consumers money to read the laws that we live under. Matt Gaetz has stood independent of his other caucus members in fighting back against the kind of moneyed interests on Capitol Hill. I'm not saying he's the most liberal or most left-wing lawmaker, but he's really unique in the sense that he has true populist middle-class politics, and he's pushed back consistently against corporate power.
You know, you're so right, and you really nailed it in your piece, and I would encourage everybody to go to lefang.com and become a subscribing member if you can, because every article is just a gem. And it's part of the reason why I've liked Matt Gaetz as a congressman. I don't know anything about his, sexual history or his drug use, but I do know that he was never charged with a crime for any of that stuff. But I'm wondering if you can kind of explain why you think there's been such united opposition to him from Republicans and Democrats alike. What is it about Matt Gaetz that is so offensive to those in Washington?
Well, look, Matt Gaetz is the type of congressman, you really don't find this on either the left or the right at all. And he's the type of congressman that appeared in a documentary earlier this year. I believe it was filmed by The Blaze, where he walked the halls of Congress and pointed out his own colleagues, his own Republican colleagues, who had engaged in what appeared to be insider trading before major votes, including folks who bought stock in defense companies at the outset of the war between Ukraine and Russia, people who bought stock in companies before there were big votes that kind of shifted billions of dollars in public equities. And he's walking around the hallways pointing out the folks that he sits down next to and legislates every day. He's ready to toss the tables and really turn over the stones and show where the swamp is kind of located in Washington, D.C. That's very unusual. Even folks who are seen as the kind of populist types on the left, people like AOC, you don't see them engaging in this type of finger pointing. Maybe she did it her first 6 months in office, but she really kind of calmed down after she got elected. He's someone who really riles folks up. And remember, it was just over 1 year ago where he led his own populist rebellion, him and about half a dozen other House Republicans, who unseated Kevin McCarthy, the House Speaker, and installed Mike Johnson, the new Speaker of the House. So this is someone who has upset many of his own Republican colleagues. Many people have a grudge against him for pointing out their corruption or conflicts of interest. And now, of course, whether or not, I can't comment on this ethics investigation. I think there are some issues there. I only kind of know what you've read and your listeners have read in the press. I don't have any special knowledge here, but I hope there's an open confirmation process where Mr. Gaetz can defend himself and discuss these matters. In terms of why there's so many fingers pointed at him and not any of the other nominees, including Pete Hegseth, who's accused of much more salacious sexual improprieties. You see exponentially more headlines about Gaetz. I think that's, again, because he's upset so many of the moneyed interests in Washington, including his own colleagues.
Yeah, so he doesn't go along with their club, so they don't have any interest in protecting him from any of these, anything, really. I mean, I guess that it comes down to that. Makes sense. All right. A lot of people have been struggling to find out since November 5th and putting forward their theories as to why Trump won. Not just won the election, but won the popular vote, won every single swing state, and at least one popular theory on the part of the punditocracy, on the part of a lot of Democratic consultants, has to do primarily with voters being racist and sexist. This was Sunny Hostin on The View talking about people of color.
I'm surprised at the result, but I'm not surprised. As a woman of color, I was so hopeful that a mixed race woman married to a Jewish guy could be elected president of this country. Mm-hmm. And I think that it had nothing to do with policy. I think this was a referendum of cultural resentment in this country.
Al Sharpton also talking about the reasons Kamala Harris lost.
There's still a lot of racism and gender bias in this country. And I think for us to ignore that and not try to bring that front and center so we can heal that would mean that we would end up in the same place. Kamala Harris is a woman of color in an interracial marriage and running as a woman to be the head of state. That is something a lot of Americans are not ready to deal with.
Lee, as best as your research can tell, when did the same American public that voted for Barack Obama twice become racist? And when did the same American public that voted for Hillary Clinton for the popular vote in 2016 then become sexist? Was that around 2017, 2021? When did that occur?
I think there are two psychological dynamics at play here. One is a concept we call projection, that these folks who have used issues around race and identity to divide audiences and to turn people against one another, for them to kind of grasp onto this issue, I think it's the height of projection from these pundits. And two, it's the kind of scapegoat mentality. There were many issues with the Democratic message, the Democratic candidate, the Democratic policy platform, the Democratic record of the last 4 years. And instead of focusing on any of these issues, we're seeing pundit after pundit scapegoat the American voter. No, it's not of course, anything about the last 4 years or the candidate or the party. Let's just blame. So, I think those are the two major psychological dynamics happening here. And it's not just these cable talking heads. You have a lot of folks within the Democratic Party elite, folks who, got a chunk of that $2.2 billion spent in this election, who did very well for themselves, making television ads and preparing talking points and, helping sell the Democratic message. They turn up short in terms of a complete election blowout. So again, they've got to blame the voters.
It's interesting because if you look at a lot of prominent progressive intellectuals and activists, people like Ralph Nader, people like Bernie Sanders, several others, they'll say it wasn't because the voters are racist. It's because the Democrats didn't do a good enough job responding to the concerns of working class voters. Why do the consultants and the people within the Democratic leadership, why do they prefer to lean on misogyny and racism as an explanation for the loss rather than do as folks like Bernie Sanders and Ralph Nader have done and say, no, we need to do a better job responding to working class concerns?
I'll give you one example. There's a lobbyist named Adam Kortovich. He's appeared on social media and elsewhere to attack Matt Gaetz and to blame the voters as racist, sexist, homophobic, etc. But his organization, Chamber of Progress, and I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, but Chamber of Progress, is funded by Google. It's funded by the big tech companies. They've had a very cozy relationship with many Democratic elites over the years. So instead of kind of changing the nature of the Democratic Party to be more of a blue-collar-based, working-class, middle-class party, they prefer it to be a party of the elites. And so rather than change this very cozy arrangement, again, they want to point the finger and blame the voters that they failed to convince.
Shopping is hard.
I can never find anything in my size.
I don't even know my size.
I buy my clothes the same place I buy my groceries.
There's a better way. Make it easy with Stitch Fix. Just share your size, style, budget, and done. Your personal stylist sends pieces picked just for you.
That was easy.
Stitch Fix. Online personal styling for everyone. Free shipping and returns. No subscription required. Get started today at stitchfix.com.
We off? 30 seconds of carefree bliss.
Oof, like wind in your hair carefree.
Oh, like using Clorox Disinfecting All-Purpose Cleaner in the home carefree.
Yes.
Like dog slobbing on the coffee table and cleaning it with Clorox Carefree.
He's on a roll now.
Spit toothpaste on the faucet.
You got it.
Peanut butter on the light switch.
Oh, spritz.
Spritz. Clorox, man. Clean feels good.
Okay, we're back.
Use as directed.
Ladies, you'll end up shopping for your guy's deodorant, right? So try Degree's Original Cool Rush. You see, last year, Degree changed the formula, and men were mad. One guy even started a petition. So Degree admitted they messed up and brought the Original Cool Rush scent back. It's clean, crisp, and actually smells like someone you want to cuddle. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So toss one in your cart and find out why it's the best-selling men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory.
Morning decisions. A creamy mocha frappuccino drink? A sweet vanilla? Maybe a smooth caramel? Or that white chocolate mocha? Whichever you choose, delicious coffee awaits. Start your day with bottled Starbucks Frappuccino drinks. Pick up a bottle near you wherever you buy your groceries.
Very interesting. Based on what you can tell, you had a piece about why young men from the Me Too generation swung to Trump. Why do you think they swung to Trump? A friend of mine who's a progressive, He said to me maybe a year and a half ago when it was still a Trump-Biden race that the reason that he thought Trump was going to lose was because of demographics. He said Trump's older voters have died off since 2016, and a lot of these young people growing up in a post-Roe versus Wade world who weren't even old enough to vote in 2020 and 2016, they can't wait to vote against him. Turned out that theory was completely wrong. Why did at least the young men migrate towards Trump? Something tells me it was more than just Joe Rogan.
Well, I think there are many dynamics here. You're seeing kind of a shift of young male voters across the industrialized world, and you see the split happening across Europe and Korea and other places. So it's really a global phenomenon. But I think it's in part rooted in material shifts in how young men are entering the world. I mean, they're entering a world that is much more hostile to their interests in some ways, and it's just very different from the world that millennials or Gen X or boomers entered when they were coming of age and coming out of college or entering the workforce. I mean, this is an era where so many young men are struggling with addiction. They're struggling with pot addiction, drug addiction, online gambling addiction, video game addiction, pornography addiction. Their peer group the suicide rates are skyrocketing, and they're looking around and they're seeing career prospects that have dimmed. The old times when young men had solid middle-class careers awaiting them are not there anymore. They're seeing more competition, and they're seeing kind of a skyrocketing of loneliness. So, given these material conditions, these conditions that so many young men face, they're also confronted with a culture that sees them with hostility, that views them as an oppressor. I made a tweet the other day, and I also put this in a column, that for the young first-time voters, the folks who just turned 18 or 19 and voting for the very first time, all they've known is Me Too. Since they became adolescents, they've been taught by the popular culture in academia, in entertainment, in politics, that they are the hegemon. They are the patriarchs. They're the ones that dominate society. And as they're kind of dealing with these contradictions, are they actually, ruling over the world? Are men that powerful? And then they're looking around their peer group who are struggling, who are, as I mentioned, dealing with addiction and dealing with a less bright career prospects. There's this contradiction, and for I think a lot of them, Trump helps clear up that contradiction. He says, okay, here's a version of masculinity. Here's a way you don't have to feel ashamed for who you are. And Kamala's also built into this. There was no kind of attempt to reach out to young men and kind of recognize their struggle at all. So just given that kind of mix, I think that's a big part of why you saw that 30-point swing where Democrats were consistently winning the young male vote, where Trump won a majority this election.
And we're talking with Lee Fang. You could check out his website and his newsletter at leefang.com. Lee, last question about the election. You had a piece chronicling the spending of the Kamala Harris super PAC. And a lot of folks are talking about all the spending that went on behalf of Kamala Harris and pointing at it being wasted. You chronicle that the super PAC spent lavishly on firms owned by PAC leadership. Future Forward spent at least $8 million on Democratic consulting firms run by its own leadership. I would say this raises a potential conflict of interest, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think there are going to be some big questions about how this money is spent. I mean, this is really just, I think, the tip of the iceberg. The New York Times earlier today had another article that kind of continued in this vein, looking at how the money of the Kamala campaign directly was spent. But if you look at the super PACs, if you look at the direct campaign, if you look at the DNC, a lot of the money has flowed to consulting firms in leadership positions on the campaign or at the leadership of these super PACs. So, just as, you're running a business, that there are issues around conflict of interest. If you're giving kickbacks to your family or to people connected to you rather than furthering your investors' money, there's questions here about there are questions in politics with the same regard. Is this money being used to elect Democrats, or is it being used to enrich a crony set of consultants who run these campaigns over and over again? I'm only using the Federal Election Commission data. There's probably a lot of other nooks and crannies that have not been explored. Mike Donnellan, one of the strategists for the Biden campaign, if you look at the Federal Election Commission, the public based money, he only received a couple $100,000 or maybe $1 million from the 2020 campaign working for Biden. It turned out later that he made something like $4 million working for Democrats that cycle. So, I think we're going to see more answers trickle out in the next weeks and months to come.
You participated in a great debate, and people could see the video regarding unilateral intervention from America's military. And I thought and I don't think it's just because I agree with you, but I thought you represented the side against military adventurism very, very well. Donald Trump, throughout his entire political career, even long before he was a presidential candidate, has always shown a bit of a non-interventionist streak. He said so publicly in all three of his campaigns, but even long before he was a candidate. Now that he's getting ready to start a second term, though, a lot of his foreign policy team, with the exception of Tulsi Gabbard, doesn't have that same history of non-interventionism. We have Marco Rubio, Secretary of State. We have Michael Waltz, National Security Advisor. Elise Stefanik, Ambassador to the UN. All of these are neocons. I'm curious how you're feeling as somebody that prefers non-intervention going into a Trump administration with people like Rubio and Waltz in a position to make policy.
Well, I see this as kind of a Nixonian moment, and I mean that in two different ways. Richard Nixon campaigned on a secret plan for peace in 1968, but he misled the American people and, in fact, escalated the war in Vietnam and secretly bombed Cambodia and Laos and, really kind of continued and fueled that war. There's that possibility that Trump will not stick to his commitment and will kind of inflame the conflicts that we see in the Middle East, inflame the conflict in Ukraine, and keep perpetuating those conflicts. The other side of that is that he could be the other Nixon, the Nixon who finally made peace with China, who opened up China, who it took an anti-communist hardliner like Nixon to kind of say, hey, I don't care what the press says about me, I don't care what Congress says about me, I'm going to China and I'm going to open up relationships with this country. And I think that possibility is just as equal, that Trump says, okay, I don't care if the press calls me a Putin stooge or, a Russian stooge, or I don't care if they call me, friendly with terrorists. I'm going to go talk to Hamas and make peace. I'm going to talk to Hezbollah and make peace. I'm going to talk to the Russians and make peace. Because he's that kind of unique politician where he's Teflon. Nothing sticks to him. He's able to sit down with our nation's enemies and hammer out agreements that most politicians are simply too scared to do, because they know that the blob or the neocons in Washington will destroy them in the press as weak on foreign policy. I see both possibilities there. And to be honest with you, I have no idea which way we'll go.
Yeah, neither do I. Fingers crossed. We'll see what happens. Lee, you do a terrific job, not only in your reporting, but whenever you're kind enough to come on this program. Really appreciate it.
Frank, thanks for having me on. Always appreciate it. Have a good night.
Thank you, Lee Fang. If you want to comment, you could certainly do so. 646-720-0635. That's 1-646-720-0635. Straight ahead.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles McKenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.